Good evening and welcome to the June 2022 Gamedev meeting of the International Game Developers Association Twin Cities chapter. My name is Beth Korth. I'm the chair of IGDATC and your host for this evening. This is the intro. That's what you're hearing right now. After we do a little bit of housekeeping, we will do some community plugs and announcements, and then on to the main event. Our presentations tonight are Creation Through Destruction, Designing Experimental Legacy Games by J.J. Otto-Hawke, and The Agile Nature of Gaming, Agile in Games and Game Development by Chris Diller and David Klaus. And then post-meeting, as always, you are welcome to join us in one of the Discord voice lounges, either Minneapolis or St. Paul, and whoever gets to whichever one first is usually where we end up. So welcome. Our meetings are open to everyone and we want to be a safe and inclusive environment for everybody in the community. If you have any issues that you need to address, you can ping one of the board members on our Discord or you can DM me personally. I am listed in the top of the Discord with our board members, Beth Korth. You can check out our safe event policy on our website also. Basically, just be respectful and you should be fine. So IGDATC is run by all volunteers. This is your volunteer board. If you are interested in volunteering to help us run some of our events or programs, if there's something you'd like to see that we don't currently do and you would like to spearhead that effort, you can contact us at igdatwincities@gmail.com. And become a member of the IGDA. For those of you who don't know, our parent organization is international, and we do get some benefits from having our membership. All of our events are open to any member of the community, whether you are an IGDA member or not, but there are some benefits for IGDA members, which include often like discounts to GDC or some kinds of discounts on computer parts and peripherals and stuff like that, which are always listed on the parent org's website. And also, if we get to a certain level of membership, we get some money, which will help us finance some of our other initiatives. So our regular event schedule right now, we have events on the second, third, and fourth Wednesday of every month. You are at the Gamedev meeting on the second Wednesday, which I host, and we have different members of the community come in and share their expertise. Sometimes we have great postmortems from local developers and stuff like that. It's always fun and always happy. And the third Wednesday is our playtest, which is run by Lane Davis, Dale, and Mark LaCroix. And that's where we have some locally developed and sometimes visitors from other areas games presented, and you can give feedback and test them out. And if you want to bring your own game, you can get some playtesting done. And then the fourth Wednesday of the month is the MNVR and HCI, which their next meeting is on the 22nd and will be hybrid again. The physical portion will be at REM 5 and then will be on YouTube. So plugs and announcements. I'm going to go first tonight. It's been a wild ride. We weren't exactly sure where 2DCon was, but now we are pumped and excited to go. Indie Island and Tabletop Terrace is, hosted by IGDATC. We partner with 2DCon to bring our local developers out there to get some playtesting done, and including now, they do have an option where you can have a vendor booth, which means that you can actually sell your merchandise, whether that be codes for the game or like stuffed animals, whatever kind of stuff you might have, pins, buttons. And if you don't want to pay for a vendor booth, you are always welcome to hand out cards with your website where people can purchase the game. But so the registration was initially listed at the end of April, but things got kind of busy, so we've extended it till July 1st, and I will send out acceptances on July 15th. And then the payment will be due on August 1st if you do want to have a booth there. I believe Joe will be sending those out, and so if you don't hear from him, you can definitely ping me. If you have any questions about the digital portion, Indie Island, that would be me that you can chat with. And then this year, Tabletop Terrace, Peter Yang, one of our board members, is going to be helping. And then Trevor, are you in here, Trevor?
I am.
Our newest IGDATC volunteer is going to be taking some point on Tabletop Terrace. Is there anything specific you'd like to plug about that?
If you are an indie board game developer or you know somebody who likes making board games, I would definitely recommend you check out Tabletop Terrace and signing up for 2D Con. Be a lot of improvements from last year, and we're really hoping to make it a great opportunity for indies in that space.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that it will be better than last year. Last year, one of the main complaints from our board game developers was that it was too loud. This year, special information that I have just received from the board, the digital portion has its very own locking room once again, just like we had several years ago. And then the tabletop will all be in the main tabletop area with a dedicated area for just the indies. So it'll be a more intimate, quiet setting so that you won't have to compete with the arcade. Anybody, we will be able to talk to our community. So, anyway, enough about that. We'll move on to David's plug. David, are you here?
Hey, what's going on? Am I audible?
I hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so as some of you may know, I've been making some videos on my YouTube channel. They might be interesting to you. They're made for people that are in this audience, like game developers. The latest one I did was on the Global Game Jam, which I did with Beth, using .Big Bang. And I sort of did a review of how that jam went with .Big Bang, and it's really fun. Actually, Beth, are you able to click on that?
I can click on that.
Okay, yeah, I've been getting some questions about the name of the YouTube channel.
Do you want me to click the YouTube?
Sure. Yeah, it's a little hard to describe exactly how I got into this circumstance, but I signed a deal for distribution. They liked the videos I was making, and so the branding isn't under my control. It is actually about making MMO games, despite the name. So I just wanted to clear that up live on the stream, because I've been getting some questions. Yeah, that's it.
All right. We'll go back to the slides. Thank you, David. And then next up, we have our REM5 Virtual Reality Laboratory special deal that I think Zach is here to talk about.
Yes, I am. Yeah, so REM5 hosts our VR meetings, and thing you want to note is in the bottom right corner, use the code MNVR, get $10 off. And Beth, if you would click on that, please.
Dun, da, da, da.
So this is a little bit hard to describe, but it's a lot of technology-based art, music, VR, of course, projectors, AR, drones flying around, a lot of craziness. There's a video a little bit farther down.
Yep.
It all flashes by kind of quickly, so you can just see if there's anything that interests you. So that's that was actually our main talk last month. That's a recumbent bike decked out as a VR controller to let you pedal and fly a personal airship, and just all kinds of interactive things and music, and it's not quite as ravey as this would lead you to believe. It's definitely the theme, but it's not quite that level of intensity. So old people like me like it too. And yeah, just a lot going on. And I believe right now that the early bird tickets are still on for sale. So you can actually double stack that code with an early bird ticket to get $20 off the regular price. So kind of a good deal if any of this interests you at all. I do not endorse the editing of this video. It's not this complete trippy rave thing that this would lead you to believe. It's a lot of people having great conversations. So that's all.
All right. So that code is the MNVR, and that'll save us $10 off of the event for the 25th.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. And are you in here too, Corbin?
Yep.
All right, your turn.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Corbin Fonville. I'm with SkillQuest, and we're helping Gen Z to encounter cool projects that will help them maybe find a career that they love or get some skills in coding or other STEM areas. And so I am looking for some help to, this would be a paid position to help us host some like hackathon style learning competitions. weekends or all week. We can kind of decide the format and be flexible, but I'm looking for some help from the community to help teach people how to do some game dev. This would be pretty entry-level stuff, at least to begin with, while we build the community. And then, we'd obviously be looking to turn that back around into more involved IGDATC members.
Yeah, it's hard with the acronym.
I'm practicing, though. I'll get it next time. Thanks,
Awesome.
guys.
So this is a paid opportunity. That's awesome. And is there, do you want them to just apply at skillquest.io? If they have questions, can they ping you on the Discord? What's the
Yep.
best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me in the Discord, Taro, #1644 if you want to send me a friend request in a DM, or you can email me corbin@skillquest.io, or just apply online. Lots of ways to get in touch, and we'll find each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, this is the point where I say, is there anything else? But really, if there's anything else by this point with the stream lag, we'll just catch you next month or post it in the Discord. So if you want to plug something, you can message us on the Discord, or you can send an email to igdatwincities@gmail.com and let us know what you've been up to, and we'll get a nice slide ready for you for next month. And we are going to move on to our presentations now. So give us just a little bit of time to switch over cameras and such. We will be starting with JJ and the creation through destruction.
All right, let me get my screen shared here. All right, everything looks good. All right. Hi, folks. I'm JJ, and I appreciate you coming to hear from me. I'm a recent graduate from MIT's Comparative Media Studies program, and I'm excited to share my master's research, Creation Through Destruction, designing experimental legacy games. So I'm sure, especially in this crowd, many of us have felt this pressure to be perfect, to always be at 100%, to push yourself into giving your best effort again and again. We may wait for conditions to be just right, the best environment for the best work. And this can manifest as a drive to collect, to preserve, to save an expensive journal for the perfect project, and then, end up never using it for its purpose. We can end up assigning perhaps this undue weight and meaning to objects, making them precious and to be revered rather than use them for what they are. Under such weight, it is really no surprise that people find destroying things to be so cathartic and satisfying. There's a pleasure in setting yourself free psychologically while also being released physically. We burn homework at the end of the year, smash dishes that are, gifted by a bad relative, crush cars that break down vindictively. Humans have been using similar rituals for cleansing and transition for ages. This physical, mental, and spiritual power has stood the test of time. Games have evolved alongside ritual and other innately human practices like storytelling. Games create this altered state of mind, game space where you follow arbitrary rules and overcome self-imposed challenges. Often, you build this special little world with your fellow players by agreeing on boundaries and demonstrating your understanding of the world's conventions to each other. Violating those kind of game social conventions can actually be more severe than breaking a game rule. One of the more recent offerings to the game space are legacy games, which emphasize the heavy weight associated with permanent, impactful decisions. Because this style of game is relatively new, the definition is still muddy, but there is common agreement that they have multiple sessions, they demand players make impactful decisions that forever alter the game, and players are unable to play the same game a second time. And then I'll get more into my specific definition that I'm using for my research a little bit later on, but this is generally what legacy games are. So for this presentation, I'm going to hit a few key parts of my research. I'm going to start by drawing some more explicit links between rituals and games and how rituals can inspire game design. Next, I'll move on to why examining legacy games is becoming increasingly relevant and important for game design and media studies, as a whole. Then I'll highlight what existing legacy games have contributed to innovations in game design, as well as what is still missing in that realm. And next, I'll explore how legacy games can be brought to another level, how they can reframe what games and playing them looks like. And then I'll get into my playtesting of my game, and then what I learned about the process. And spoilers, there's fire and destruction. And finally, I'll get into the impact of the research, the master's research, and thoughts about the future of the legacy game genre. So first, connections between rituals and games. There is significant overlap between rituals and games. Games are performed as part of rituals like the Olympic Games, and there are ritualistic elements to games. Many of us are familiar with the rock, paper, scissors chant in action as a ritual of fate. Still, it is possible to create a dichotomy by associating games with the binaries of victory and defeat, and then rituals with this equality and wholeness. But I find it more helpful for research and game design to put them on the same spectrum. So it would follow that games that don't divide players into winners and losers would lean closer to rituals on this games rituals spectrum. So they are inherently linked and should be utilized a little bit more. So I think why not lean into that when we're designing? How do we draw inspiration from a parallel practice? How do we overlap games and rituals and storytelling to give us legacy games? So next, why am I looking at legacy games? Why now? Why are they relevant? Board games have always evolved to follow the eras and the money, reflecting our values and views of leisure time. And as gamers' interest in tabletop role-playing games like D&D and Warhammer grew, and Euro games like Settlers of Catan and others followed suit, the investment in game components, the physical pieces that you play with, did as well. Players could have boxes of lovingly painted minis, detailed maps, and get more bang for their buck from the same game. And then, especially as Kickstarter came on scene, games got bigger boxes, more expensive components, and demanded a lot more shelf space. And for many, board gamer is synonymous with a board game collector. And for avid collectors, that can be an anxiety around preserving their expensive investment. They might buy 2 copies of a game, one to leave unopened and one to play, with very gentle, careful, clean hands. But as people are forced to move around to find work or downsize to save money, especially now in the COVID era, it becomes clear that 4 50-pound boxes of board games is just not really sustainable. Instead, more recently, when we look to the future of board games, we're starting to turn to more experiential games with fewer mechanics and components, kind of like escape rooms. And then exploring legacy games is so relevant now because they reflect our current need for collaborative experiences that give us permission to play around and break things. There's something just so freeing about not having to be careful to play like you did as a kid without worry about making a mess. Next, looking at the innovations and limitations of legacy games that led to the most recent surge in popularity. These Vanguard games have taught us a lot about striving to upset the norms of board gaming in pursuit of this, ever better game. Still, they have set some limitations for themselves that has narrowed the design space in some ways, and kind of changed this rule-breaking attitude they had when first imagining what legacy games could be. So first, some key contributions. Legacy games started with this grand vision of blurring the line between real world and the game world. No reset, no save, only your decisions permanently changing the game as you physically change the game too. And playing in this liminal space allows designers to reorient the gameplay experience around narrative and reflection rather than winning and solving. And more attention can be paid to creating and destroying the game artifacts. And we can really dig into what each component truly contributes to the experience. And early legacy games especially really helped bring collaborative world building to the forefront and expose players to the freedom of creating a world that really embraces them, that represents them. And finally, legacy games really started to grow to reflect their players. And this is kind of recalling this nostalgia of if you find a really old beat up game box and you open it up and you find these, drawings or whatever rule changes you made from 10 years ago, and you're flooded with those memories. So it really, really capitalizes on that aspect. And then even with all these innovations, some legacy game designers continue to hold themselves back a little bit. This can be for financial reasons, makes complete sense. Legacy games take a really long time to playtest. They can require a lot of narrative content that needs to be generated. And the components can be really expensive, as I've mentioned. If a customer is going to dish out $60, $80, $100 for a game, the thought is that they'll want to replay it as much as possible. So as a result of this thinking, many legacy games have shied away from this sort of true destruction aspect that they had when people were first thinking about what legacy games were going to be. And then so they either sort of design it away altogether with removable stickers and booster packs of new stickers, or telling players to just set aside any cards that are removed from the game, or they include it but kind of incidentally, such as opening sealed envelopes or sealed boxes, which, to players, it definitely feels like destruction, but it's not really an essential, fully integrated part of the game, the destruction itself, in the sense that I could just as easily flip to the needed page in a guide instead of getting new information from the envelope. So it's a little bit more that these types of legacy games are rearranging the components rather than destroying them. So then I wanted to focus a little bit more on integrating destruction. So, if we want to keep the innovative spirit that really started early legacy games, we've got to really lean into this destruction aspect of it, which is not available to everybody if you're a company that really needs to make sure you're making as much money as possible, or making enough money to continue your business. You might not be able to experiment with these types of games. So it's really on to indie and passion game developers to really add to this experimental space as much as they can, and really kind of think about what makes legacy games special. They have choices with meaningful, permanent changes, and you really want to keep these as a keystone for the whole genre moving forward. So going off of that, how can we make destruction a vital, fully integrated part of a legacy game? So really first we should expand our idea of what games and playing them look like. There's a sense that legacy games are destroying something, and I use that terminology as well, but I use it in the sense, context of simultaneously creating something. So the process of transforming elements of the game, an act of deletion, is still part of the overall story. We see this theme a lot in performance and conceptual art, which is media that have always inspired us to examine our ideas of what art looks like. And in process art, especially, the act of destroying a blank canvas with paint is more important than the finished piece, this sort of idea of process over product. And this idea of embracing destruction as an experience is an important but rather underutilized tool for legacy game designers in this area. And while we're re-examining our understanding of destruction, we can re-examine what is meant by legacy itself. As I mentioned earlier, legacy games can be understood as the intersection of game, ritual, and storytelling. And then legacy more broadly can be understood as the interplay of this past, present, and future. Wisdom of the past is dynamic. It's always evolving to suit the needs of the current generation. It's always reinforcing a connection to what came before and how it guides us in the present to shape our future. Legacy games could do the same. They already blur this sort of space between the game world and the real world. So why not this time as well? How can we explore the concept of legacy within a legacy game? So on to my favorite part, the game development and playtesting part. So first I had to identify the best methods to approach my design questions. You go to MIT, they're not just going to let you start doing something. You have to give them good reasons to give you money and take you seriously. And I knew I wanted to explore the design space and focus on holistic player experiences, probing these established norms and finding new approaches and seeing what's possible. So critically, my priority wasn't creating a broadly marketable game or doing a quantitative analysis to prove that one game design is better than another. Instead, I was exploring the design space for the legacy concept, how it manifests in games, and what kind of dynamics it supports. And then exploratory design research, which is the direction I went, is very well suited to tackling questions related to these topics because it produces these very expressive experiential data, and it deeply involves the participants in order to really facilitate this speculation. So I started with existing games just to make sure I understood what was already out there. But games are kind of using this legacy label well, pretty liberally. So I first had to narrow down the definition to one that aligned more closely with the definition that I was going to use, the sort of original definition. And the categories are purely functional for this research, so they don't cover every situation. I wouldn't recommend using these in everyday conversation. These are just the categories that I identified. And so first I pulled out non-legacy storytelling games like Dixit, Mysterium, Mad Libs, which they don't require this artifact creation. They don't have persistent game states. There's not really any meaningful destruction. And there is a range of vague to very concrete win conditions. And so the first legacy category that I pulled apart is legacy storytelling games, which include games like The Quiet Year and The Ten Commandments. And in these games, artifact creation is encouraged, but not necessarily required, and there's no meaningful destruction, so the game could be played again. Like pure storytelling games, the narrative in these legacy games is open-ended, and it affects all players, and there are multiple win conditions as it plays out, but there is sort of a final win condition that is a little bit more vague. And then the emphasis is on this unfolding story and the world building, similar to campaign-style games like tabletop role-playing games like D&D. And then for these games, legacy mostly refers to this persistent growing game state and the fallout of story decisions, rather than the artifact creation, meaningful destruction. And then the second category I identified is legacy experience games, which include games like The King's Dilemma and Gloomhaven. These games require artifact creation, and storytelling is really structured, often in this sort of choose your own adventure style. They can have pretty concrete win conditions and involve enough destruction that the game cannot be easily played again. You do have to do some work to be able to play Gloomhaven again. And critically, though, destruction is not necessarily essential to the gameplay. Kind of as I mentioned before, is using reversible stickers or the sort of sealed envelope method. And so in these cases, legacy refers to this persistent game state and the fallout of story decisions and these evolving artifacts. But we can still push things a little bit further to make destruction a much more integrated part of the process. So then the third category is legacy experience adventures, which includes games like Beak, Feather, and Bone. And games require artifact creation. The storytelling is much more open-ended and shaped by all the players, and there is a vague or even non-existent win condition. Like an escape room, the emphasis is on the experience rather than a strictly defined win. And then most importantly, destruction is an essential part of the gameplay and results in a single unique experience. The game cannot proceed without this type of destruction. And legacy is used in these cases to refer to that evolving and disappearing artifacts, the persistent game state, the fallout of story decisions, an open-ended win condition, and destruction being essential to play the game. And then the experimental game that I was creating fell into that category. Next, I distributed a survey and interviewed a whole bunch of people involved in many facets of media, artists, indie board gamers, tabletop role-playing game players, and lots more. I really wanted to get a deeper understanding of their experience with legacy games and other media and what changes they'd like to see. They had some more specific needs, but generally they fell into one of these categories. So they really wanted to see more collaborative world building, more divergent stories, so giving them the same pieces, but then being able to build their own story from there. They really wanted to see the story transformation and the board transformation as a way to sort of track their progression. They really wanted to be able to chronicle and reflect, so taking the time to talk about what has happened to their characters over the course of the whole game. And they really wanted a lot more multi-sensory experiences, so being able to manipulate items, different kind of tactile experiences with the game. And they really wanted a variable time commitment, so they wanted to be able to either set it up quickly and then play for an hour or play for 5 hours, whatever they were feeling at the time. And then trying to address all of those needs influenced my design goals. So I went into the design with a few goals based on my prior research, primarily examining both the physical action of creating and destroying, as well as the experiential aspect. And then compared to some previous legacy games, I really wanted to lean into this destruction while also embracing the sort of shift into experiences. And then secondary goals I kept in mind either because the literature suggested them, like ritual and performance, and discussion and reflection, or because I was really personally curious about them, like enduring and ephemeral artifacts and collaborative world building. And something I personally have not seen a lot in games, which is that death is not a punishment, but is part of the process of moving forward. So basic overview of the game so far after about 8 months of playtests. Players play as the leaders of bands that are united under one community that is rediscovering their ancestral homeland after the gods rescue them from a dying world. Over many generations of explorers, each unique band strengthens their abilities as leaders die, events are handled, inhabitants are met, and places are explored. Connections to ancestors ensure the future success as their wisdom and teachings are adapted to new situations, helping to uncover a shared history and paint a collective future. So first, players pick a band of families that they will represent. Each one has a unique abilities that they can contribute to the community. Band sheets have this biographical information about the band, leader timeline, earned and redeemed skills, and the bios were really a jumping off point to create the band's story, but players could really take it in any direction. And then the main purpose was to have the timeline skills all on the same page to really be able to trace consequences and get an idea of the overall view of your accomplishments all in one place. And then next, players create a handful of band members that represent the current leader, and then whoever will succeed them. And these leader cards gave a name and a face to the character for some bonding, hopefully for some investment by the players in the story. Then players lay out these encounter cards. They pick the number that they want to do for the session, and they lay them all out. And then they pick a unique ink color, and they perform this sort of fingerprinting ritual. They take turns trying to touch as many of the cards as possible, one hand at a time. And this is the first little bonding community ritual that they do. And people just really liked the ink and putting fingerprints on everything. Then they stack the cards and start their journey by dripping water and paint on the starting spot and swirling it around to make a path. And then their next location that they want to explore is anywhere on that path. I tried a few methods before landing on this sort of swirling the watercolor paint method. There's a lot more hands-on and active for the players, and really it was their first exposure to the creation through destruction mechanics, which was something that I realized I really had to ease players into doing. So each new location that they go to flips an encounter card, which is either a number, a face card, or a major arcana card from the tarot deck. And face cards are NPCs that they meet. Major arcana are big events that offer 2 choices, and numbers are challenges. So the numbers present a community, then a leader challenge. So everyone's abilities contribute to the community score, but only the leaders that have their fingerprints on the back of the card contribute to the leader score, and they're also the only ones that gain the rewards of the card. If the players succeed in both those challenges, then they fill out the card to name and describe the place, creature, or event that they encountered. And then once all the cards are filled out, players have a tarot deck representing the world that they built. I am aware of only 2 groups that finished their encounter deck completely and then used it for actual readings. And both reported getting pertinent results. Not entirely sure what that means, but I am glad that they could successfully use the artifact outside of the game. And then if leaders fail a challenge, they sacrifice themselves, or they die for any other reason, their card is immediately burned on the pyre. After this funeral rite, that leader's band has access to the abilities that the leader gained over their lifetime. So this is them passing on the wisdom to the next generation. So, critically, there's really no way to level up your abilities without a leader first earning them and then dying in order to, guide the band from beyond. And this was a really big part of reframing death not as an indication of failure, but as a very necessary part of moving forward and making progress. You have to try and not succeed to eventually overcome the challenge. Really kind of driving home this idea that the community that you're playing is only as strong as its collective ancestral wisdom. At the end of each session, players perform a tattooing ritual by etching a design into their scratch-off silhouettes. Usually the symbols really only had meaning for the tattooer, but some players really enjoyed fully drawing out the funniest moments that happened. And they also contribute to a community chronicle, which is a smaller sort of at a glance summary of what they did that session that they can look back on in days or years just to remember what they accomplished that session. And I really had a great time with all of my players. And I think their quotes are a really good illustration of whether I'm hitting these design goals that I set out to hit. My first primary goal, having a product focused aspect that is both enduring and ephemeral. Players really loved having permission to be playful, being able to look back on the mess that they'd made and keep some components while burning others. And honestly, most players just really loved the burning part. It unlocked something primal in them. They loved the burning. My second primary goal, a process-focused experience. A big chunk of the interviews, players devoted to describing this feel of the game and the emotions that it provoked. They talked about freedom from perfection, this permission to perform badly, and questioning what we think of as the right way to play a game. For many of the players that weren't already avid gamers, so ones that, really this was either their first or one of their first board games, they admitted that letting themselves just play was really stressful. But then as the game went on, they were able to let go of some of that anxiety and just, let themselves mess up. That's the point of the game, is to mess up. Then my secondary goals, ritual elements. Players really absolutely loved the fingerprinting ritual and the funeral pyre. And people were really honestly surprised when we actually set things on fire. So that was always an excellent interaction with players. And the discussion and reflection. Reviews are pretty mixed for the discussion and reflection. Some really liked having this deep conversation with each other, while others did to more give a joke answer and keep the game moving. This idea that death is not a punishment. One thing that kept happening was players just falling over themselves to die and get their ability points, which was one of the best conversations to listen to. Is anytime they fell into this debate over who should die for the best, as the best choice for everybody. And collaborative world building, like the discussion prompts, reviews really varied by group. Some liked taking the time to create a rich world, while others wanted to, quickly get back to the action of challenges and burning things and swirling paint around. And, honestly, I can't say I blame them. That is a very fun part of the game. Pacing is definitely a big part of what I'm going to address in the next iteration. And so finally, the impact and looking to the future. I find that the key impact of this work falls into three categories: reframing, redefining, and retracing. As you can see, I love alliteration. First, reframing. This calls attention to where the future of board games is headed. Expensive, elaborate Euro games and similar games always have their place. People love them. I love them. But there is an emerging interest in games that rely more heavily on the experiential aspects, such as, game rooms and other game-like experiences are getting more popular because they're an event. They are a process, making memories rather than items holding memories or making memories. and then to make social meaningful games. These experience-heavy directions really seem the most likely that things will keep going. And people, when they think about Euro games, they think about competition and victory points and long hours of intense strategy and intricate rules, which is a big part of their appeal. But of course, some people are intimidated by that. And legacy games instead ask us to imagine games with fire, with painting, with community world building, with lasting artifacts that really reflect every hand that touched them. And we can think more deeply about the purpose of games and what we want from them, what they give to us. People really want this release of tension. And, like with escape rooms, sometimes throwing yourself at a problem instead of pondering over it can be fun. It can be that release. And really, making mistakes can be freeing. Next, redefining, like any emerging term, of course, the legacy game definition, as I've said, is nebulous and it gets tweaked as more games enter the space. But through this research, I really want the term to continue evolving so that it can stand independently as its own genre, and we can really agree on what we mean when we say, hey, come play my legacy game, or is this game a legacy game? We want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And when we redefine legacy to really be this ethos that the game is built around, then designers are invited to explore this liminal space that's created by blurring the boundary between the real world and the game world. My hope is that this more sort of philosophical definition of legacy keeps the design space open-minded and inspires more meaningful game experiences. And then finally, retracing. Even when looking to the future of games, when we're focused on the cutting edge, it is important to draw inspiration from our history as well. There's a reason that certain practices, like storytelling rituals, have withstood the test of time, and drawing from that wisdom can really make our games more impactful. A legacy is active. It's how past wisdom is adapted to help us in the present. And legacy games ask us to look back on our history and find the fun in our practices and reflect on builds connections and a shared world, even today. So looking into an idealistic future for legacy games, so looking beyond the hard research that I've done and looking at them as a whole, I'd like to further explore this sort of psychological and spiritual and transformative power of games. Anyone who has played a profoundly moving game like this War of Mine knows how deeply a game can affect you. And so I wonder, how can we harness this medium's grip on us to improve ourselves as well as our communities? And even more blue sky, there is this emerging idea of game designers playing a contemporary, quote, soul guiding role, unquote, which is more deeply intertwining games with ritual practices and storytelling's role in preserving culture. Games can really, allow us to test out different identities and play with our roles in society and imagine fantastical and more equitable worlds and bring to the forefront parts of ourselves that, we might not otherwise thoroughly examine. Some people, when they play D&D, they bring forward a part of themselves that they haven't really explored as much and they want to get to know. And this type of very purposeful game design is super critical to me, and it gives me hope for the future of games and, especially the people who play them. And that's it. Thanks again for sticking with me. I hope I gave you some good reasons to think differently about legacy games and where they're headed. And then depending on time, I can take a couple questions, but I think we're pretty good on time. So
Yeah, we're doing great on time. Thank you, JJ. That was amazing. I knew it was going to be interesting because I absolutely love how thoughtful you are in game design. I'm going to give this stream a little bit of time to catch up so that if there are questions, we can read them. I think they're about 20 seconds behind us.
okay, awesome.
But I guess one of my questions is, so you said that people really like the destruction part.
Yes.
Is that like a consistent theme throughout all of the playtests? Because I feel like I played, I think it was Pandemic Legacy, and like
Yeah.
you're supposed to rip a card or something,
Yep.
and
Yep.
like there was such anxiety amongst the
Absolutely.
whole table. Like, was there anybody who was like, "You can't burn my card" or whatever? Like, was there any like
Yeah,
hesitancy?
there was definitely a lot of hesitancy. A lot of, the final design that I came up with, a lot of it was really structured around how do I slowly introduce destruction to people? So, they have that map at the beginning. And that's a little bit easier because they think, oh, this is watercolor paper. Art is supposed to happen here. Destruction is supposed to happen here. That's fine. But then I give them a card, and the material that it's made of, they start to think, okay, I'm not supposed to destroy this. Like, if I paid $80 for this, I don't want to destroy it. So I definitely had a lot of players who were super hesitant about that. Really, honestly, what it took was one person burning something, and then everybody wanted to burn their stuff. So, if you had that one person who goes in and says, you know what, guys, let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. And they end up enjoying it. I did have, interestingly, two players who very much were just, no, I'm not gonna destroy my card. I'm not gonna do that. And that was fine because their characters were significantly leveled behind everybody. So they kind of realized, if I just want to be stubborn and keep this card and not contribute to the ancestral knowledge of this game, that's my choice, but it is going to affect the rest of the players. So, some games you can decide not to destroy something, just kind of put it aside. Like Pandemic Legacy, you can kind of just put that card aside. But the way that my game is structured, you just physically cannot advance without actually destroying the card. So that it really, really tried to force players to, let go, give it that first destruction. Because once you do that first destruction, the gate's open. Everybody wants to do it. So,
Yeah,
yes,
I do love that.
definitely ran into a lot of hesitancy and anxiety around that.
That's especially cool because you talked about, and Martin even commented, the soul guiding and like the social impact of this game design. Like you have to let go in order to improve and get better, right? Like that's a
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
cool lesson. I love it. That's great.
Yeah,
So
definitely a
Lane's got
lot
a
of.
question.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
How did you see player behavior evolve as people played multiple games or sessions? And how did more experienced players interact with less experienced players?
Yeah, so most of the groups where they played with the same group each time. So with them, at least, it was usually the same experienced people playing together. And definitely, like I said, um, the first session was a lot of getting over the anxiety of destroying things, kind of understanding the mechanics, kind of gauging with the fellow players. How seriously do we want to take this? What do we want our world to be? Do we want it to be, sci-fi? Do we want it to be steampunk? Do we want it to be fantasy? And then how in depth? How in depth do we want to go into these cards? Do we want to spend a good 10 minutes, writing out a whole collaborative world building section, or do we kind of want to just put down a quick answer, laugh about it, and move on? So I definitely saw both approaches. And then as they played more sessions, they really crystallized on those. So either they decided, yes, we're going to go super deep in it, and then every single session after that was even deeper and even deeper, and we need bigger cards, JJ, because I can't fit all this information on one card. Versus the ones who did it kind of short, they started to get shorter and shorter. They honestly started to look like Cards Against Humanity cards, where they just kind of have like a quick funny punchline on them. So it's really interesting just to look at the two different kind of decks afterward and see where they went with it. And then I only had one or two groups where it was a mix of experienced and unexperienced. And I have to say that those groups were biased because both groups included somebody who was a very experienced DM for D&D. So he was very used to pulling in the other players, making sure they had something to say, that they made it clear how seriously they wanted to take it, or if they wanted to move on. So I would say that that's not a perfect representation of how an experienced player would play with a less experienced player, but I'm certainly grateful for him and that he was able to do that for them.
Awesome. Another question is, where else do you have info on this, or how would you encourage other designers to start exploring this space?
Yeah, absolutely. What I can do is I can make like a Word doc and drop it in the Discord, or pass it off to Beth to distribute to people. And on it, I'll include, of course, my thesis and information from there, as well as a bunch of the sources that I used, especially the ones about this sort of soul guiding role. Super interesting. I did not have enough time in my master's thesis years to get into it, but there's so many other directions that you can approach even this topic from. So I'm happy to share all of that with people because I want to see more games like this. I want to see where legacy games are going to go. So very happy to spread that, people.
Yeah, we'll definitely drop that in the Discord. Let's see. Dale says, do you feel like legacy games innately have an opportunity for the game to be a moment instead of one meant to be recorded?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I struggled during the design of this of, how do I have ephemeral experiential game that also leaves a permanent artifact? So balancing that was a big part of the research itself. Because I think there are a lot of moments where it's special because, you're not going to get it back. You have this moment with somebody, and it's special because you have decided that in your amount of time on Earth and their amount of time on Earth, you decided to share it together. So that in itself is special. And you can't record that. That's not something you can write down. So definitely when I was having them record something that was more permanent, like on the cards, definitely emphasize it as, this is a sort of writing exercise almost. So the reason you are writing this down is not because you want to record the jokes and the feelings and everything that you had. It's because you want to write down this sort of world that you're making together that you want to revisit for a D&D campaign or like a Monsters of the Week campaign or some kind of campaign. But definitely to keep the emphasis on the conversation. And like the major arcana cards are based around a writing prompt. So really getting people to put down the card, talk about the question for a while. Like one of them is about, what is fairness? Is it, equality? Is it equity? Discuss. And less philosophical ones as well, but ones that were really about sharing this moment with the people that you're surrounding yourself with, and then don't record that. Don't make a note. Yes, we joked about philosophy, keeping it more as that's the conversation that you're having, and then recording stuff that you want to use later as part of a campaign or a tarot deck, like I said. So keeping those separate was definitely a big consideration during the course of designing.
I think it's funny. So, what other kind of light questions are there in the game? What is fair, equity or equality?
Yeah, that's one of the not so light ones. But there's like for example, there's one for the tower. So the tower in tarot is very much about um, uprooting things, making huge changes, um, and they have the choice on that one of uh, is learning about reflection or is it about doing it over again? And then you have the choice of you can put the card back in the deck, and so the game keeps going, or you can take the card out of the deck, which ends the game. So kind of giving them this choice of something in the game to decide if they want to conclude or not, and something out of game they can talk about. Where are we getting our experience? Is this, do we want to keep playing? Do we want to go again? Giving them that agency to control how long the game goes. Um, yeah, yeah.
Awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you keep us up to date on your continued playtesting and the status of the game, because I'm
Absolutely.
sure we would love to playtest it with you here too.
I would love you all to play it.
So if you want to drop any of like your information, everything like that, you can drop that in the general discussion uh, plaza area there in the Discord server.
Perfect.
Anything like that, and I'll make sure it gets disseminated to our Slack buddies that aren't on our Discord and everything like that, so everyone will know about it.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for coming. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. I do have one last question. Are you
Mhm.
going to be hanging out after the event to chat in the Discord, maybe?
Yes, I think I'll be able to do that.
Awesome. So then we will catch you in one of the lounges afterwards. Thank you so
Great.
much, Jade.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right, and then we are going to have a short intermission for two reasons. One, I'm thirsty, and two, our next presenters have asked that I ask you a question so that we can get some response in the chat. Hang on a second, Gabe. Sorry, guys. My son's in here. Shh. All right. So the question that they have for you is think about the best team you've been on. What made working with that team great? And if you could put your responses into the YouTube chat so that we can use that for our first interactive portion of our next game, that will be, or our next presentation, sorry, that will be great. I will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, so we are back from intermission, and our next presentation is Chris Diller and David Klaus talking about the agile nature of gaming. Are you guys both in here?
Yeah, we are.
Awesome. All right, then I am going to just mute myself and go away. It looks like you were interacting with the stream. Did you want me to read any of the responses, or are you good to start with that?
I think we're gonna try to keep track of it between the two of us. But if we miss anything, please speak up so that we don't leave anyone out.
Awesome. All right, then I will hand it over to y'all.
All right, I should be sharing my screen. Let me know if you can't see it.
Give it a minute here to get loaded up.
All right, hold on. Let me give it another shot here.
I'm seeing your screen right now, Klaus.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in the Discord as well. Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us here. This feels like it's not our normal audience, which is really exciting for both of us. We're both agile coaches, but we're gamers, even if we're gamers in kind of a different way from each other. So we're really excited to be here to talk a little bit about agile and how agile shows up in games and game development. All right, so we asked you this prompt, or Beth did, to think of the best team that you have ever been a part of and what made being on the team so great. Lots of really cool responses that I saw going through the feed there. So I saw like mutual respect, I saw honesty, I saw bringing levity or exceptional camaraderie to the group, positive people, listen to one another, lots of unique ideas from a variety of interests, complementing strengths, variety of projects, emphasis on exploring innovation, common goal, cooperation, patience, varied skill, and think of the A team. So I thought that was a great kind of list there. So I want to make a call back to these here in a little bit as we get into some of what Agile is all about and how I think some of the examples that you shared here tie in really, really well with that. Before we get too far into this, we always like to start out with some kind of like learning objectives for the session. And so our hope here is that after our time together today, you'll walk away with these three things: understanding what it means to have an Agile mindset and knowledge of Agile's principles and values, a discussion on how Agile can be especially valuable in the game development arena, and then recognize how the Agile mindset shows up in the games that we play without us even thinking about it. So keep an eye out for those as we're going through our spiel today. First, maybe a little bit about us. So my name is Chris Diller. I'm an Agile coach. I'm a leadership coach. I've been doing this Agile thing for about 10 years or so. I've also given talks at other conferences, at meetups, at other workshops. I've spoken at like Agile Games 2019. I gave a talk about how Agile and the board game Pandemic work together really well. I also co-organize along with my partner in crime tonight, David Klaus, on the Agile Games Twin Cities meetup. And we'll tell you about that a little bit more at the end of our time together today. But I'd love to introduce Klaus and have him share a little bit about himself.
Awesome. Yeah, I am very similar to Diller here, in which I am an Agile coach, Scrum Master of 10 years. I have had the luck of working in the games industry. So I was a producer at Riot Games for almost 5 years, working on League of Legends. But I also had the opportunity to work with a few coworkers there on some side projects, as well as with Dr. Ashley Godbold on a little game to teach Agile principles to people who could interact with it in a way that isn't just like a presentation all the time. So it's pretty sweet. And then, as Diller mentioned, I had the opportunity of co-organizing the Agile Game Twin Cities meetup as well.
All right, so we're going to start off with a little bit of like, what is this Agile thing? So not sure how many of you have had exposure to this. What's interesting to me is like even hearing JJ's presentation right before this, there were so many Agile principles that were showing up. And so I would say even if you're new to Agile, you're probably not probably already have this mindset a little bit as you're going through the games that you develop or the games that you play. So we're going to look to try to draw some parallels in between those and show you how this shows up, how this agile thing that's kind of happening at corporations all over the place is also showing up at the indie games you're all working on and the games that we all love to play. So we're going to start off with a couple different definitions of agile. First is straight out of the dictionary, the ability and easily, and then from a more like agile, capital A agile, as we talk about it in our context, is the ability to create and respond to a change. It's a way of dealing with and ultimately succeeding in an uncertain and turbulent environment. And we think that fits really well with how games are developed, how games are played, right? You've got a very turbulent environment in many games, and you've got to have that kind of adaptive approach as you go in order to be successful. What we want to focus on here first is that agile is a mindset. If any of you have worked in industry before, I know somebody mentioned Best Buy on there. Lots of times agile gets talked about as something that you do. We want to get away from that a little bit. There are agile practices that fall under this agile umbrella, things like Scrum, things like Kanban, if you're familiar with either of those. But we want to focus on what agile is first, is it's a mindset and it's a way of thinking about things. And that mindset is described through 4 values that come through a document called the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. The authors of that also further defined it through 12 principles. And then after that is finally where you get to the manifestation of Agile through all those different practices. When you start talking about minimum viable products, you start talking about product backlogs, you start talking about sprints and Scrum and product iterations and all of that kind of thing. That's the far right side, and it's not where we want to focus most of our time today. We want to focus more on that mindset, values, principles kind of side. So we're going to dive in first a little bit on the values. So this next slide here has the 4 Agile values. This is what's commonly referred to as the Agile Manifesto. This was created in 2001 by a bunch of folks from the software industry, and they came up with this statement that they all basically agreed to. And it's this idea that we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, they've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And what I call out here is like that overstatement and how important that is. Klaus, I want you to jump in here. Like what's standing out to you here?
Yeah, I think when I see, especially number 1 on here, when I hear friends of mine who work at companies who, talk about being agile or doing agile, or on teams where people have been frustrated with what they perceive as agile, this is the one that gets to be forgotten, which is that it's individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The processes and tools are important, but we're not going to adhere to them to sacrifice or at the cost of how people work together. So if you look at the chat, all the things that you talked about for what makes a team great, they sit on the individuals and interaction side for the most part. Very rarely does somebody say like, man, I really liked working with Jira. That's what made my team amazing. Or, gosh, that process sure was super fun. The focus is usually on how they interact with each other, and it's on the people from that, because that's where the most value happens. So I'm going to take it from here, Diller, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, please.
So then we go to number 2, which is working software over comprehensive documentation. And so this puts the emphasis on, we want to make stuff that people can use. The documentation, if it gets big, heavy, and it gets really long to read, like that's great. It's good to have good documentation so people can reference it. But the most value comes from something that people can actually use. When we go to the next one, it's customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This one harkens back to project management. So I have some experience in the project management days, and a lot of the effort was put into how do we negotiate the right contract up front, instead of asking the question like, how can we incorporate the people that are going to use our product or our game or whatever we're making in the process, so that they can give us feedback and we can actually learn from them as we're doing it, what resonates and what doesn't resonate. I think there were points during the previous presentation that hit on this where you were talking about, this is something that people resonated with. That watercolor map was an example of that. I thought that was super cool to see. Those things happen from customer collaboration, not from, did we negotiate what we agreed to up front and then point to the contract and say, this is what you said. No, let's talk about what's actually valuable, because we're learning as we go. And then the last one is responding to change or following a plan. Speaks to the same thing, right? We're not here to create a plan and only deliver on that plan. The world changes rapidly. If something has changed that we need to adapt to, we got to do it. We can't just stick to the plan. In this case, you might have a new technology that comes out. If you're delivering something that isn't going to be used by the time you deliver it because you're sticking to the plan, you're really not delivering something of value. And so all these are trying to be focused on what is valuable here. So if you look at the bottom, there's a really important piece here, though. It's not saying there's no value in the things on the right. It's that when we get the opportunity to value the things on the left more, we see better results. So I have examples of where I've worked on teams where some of these things weren't an option. I worked in the medical technology software field. Comprehensive documentation was incredibly important in that field, because if it wasn't properly documented and somebody used it inappropriately or wrong, someone could die. Our value was much more on, was it documented correctly? And then could people use the software from there? The focus here is, as much as you can push these to kind of lean to the left, that's where you want to focus getting the most value out of. Anything to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I've seen you do when facilitating this with the group is like actually put each of these on like a slider and say, like, for this team, like, where should we be kind of anchoring it? And so like your example there about the medical field and maybe needing to be a little more towards the comprehensive documentation than you may need to be on some other teams. I think that's a great example of like focusing on value. The other point I would make is I sometimes like to think of these as the items on the right in service of the things on the left. Like how can the documentation that we have make that working software or that functional game better? How might the contract that we have in place enable better collaboration? How might the plan that we created allow us to respond to a change? How might our processes and tools be there to serve the individuals and interactions, as opposed to holding people accountable to a process that was arbitrarily created?
Yeah, I love that.
There's a comment in the chat that I wanna ask you about. So somebody wrote basically reiterating some stuff we talked about on the last slide, but saying it's not about doing a prescribed set of things. It's about adopting what works to make you productive. I wonder if you could share maybe a little bit about how the team you worked with at Riot did, especially in like the context of like Scrum as a prescribed like set of activities.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the majority of my time and the team that I use for most of my examples, I worked on the skins team at Riot. So we created all of the cosmetic skins that are in the game. And we had a variety of skill sets. We had concept artists, visual effects artists, we had tech artists, we had people who were just like hooking everything up to the systems with which we created the content in the game. We had splash artists who were creating all this. We couldn't possibly have everyone share each other's work. There's just too much development of their particular craft. What ended up happening for us was we asked, how far can we allow people to have a conversation to see problems up ahead and still kind of phase things? We still did, in some ways, what felt like waterfall. We had to do handoffs, but we incorporated what we could from Scrum and from other methods in order to make us get the value out of some of those. So stand up, for example, we had 40 people on the team. We're not going to go around and ask every individual of 40 people, the traditional questions. In stand-up, traditionally it's asked of, what'd you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Do you need any help? It's a meeting that's done every morning. On our team, we all got together around the board and said, hey, does anybody need to have a conversation with anyone else on the team or need help? Or is there something that needs to be shared with the rest of the group? Like, super cool. Worked great, because the value there was, are people collaborating to accomplish a goal? Not, does everyone have vision of the status of everything. In fact, we trusted each other. We didn't even care what the status was. We knew that the person next to us was going to get it done. It was hard, but it was really good. And I shared this with Diller while we were kind of waiting and chatting in the room. I asked one of the gurus of Agile, like from the software side, like, are we doing this right? Like, are we okay? He goes, are you successful? Like, yeah, my team's awesome. He's like, sounds like you're doing it right. Like, run with it, which was really cool in the moment to hear. Like, there's no method that you have to use. It's the values and that mindset. It's really good to instill.
Yeah, I love that a story, right? It's totally anchoring on that a team, how they're working together, how they're interacting, and like process tools, all that stuff comes second. It's built in support of the way that works best for them and the way that they're able to best deliver value to their end customer.
Absolutely. All right, so we are going to go over the principles. We've got a lot of them. There's 12. As we go through them, I want you to kind of think about any of them that particularly stand out to you as exciting, or you're like, what the heck does that even mean? Confusing, or frustrating, where you're like, I don't agree with that. Because these aren't unchallengeable, right? Like, we can talk about these and figure out how they show up for your work. The moment of the value in this part of the presentation is, how can we focus on the ones that this group is passionate about learning more about? So we'll rapid fire through them, but as we do that, if something stands out, put it in the chat and we'll kind of keep an eye on that so we can dive a little bit deeper into the ones that people care about. So Diller, I'm going to take the first 3 and then I'll let you do it so they don't have to listen to me talk forever, because no one wants to listen to that forever. So the first one on here is satisfy customers by delivering early and often. So you want to deliver stuff to them as quickly as you can. 2, welcome changing requirements, even late in development. This one I want to highlight is that doesn't mean you accept and implement every single changing requirement. You welcome them. You want to hear them because there might be something good that comes out of it, but sometimes you have to say no. No is a reasonable response. And then number 3, deliver value frequently with a preference for the shorter time scale. This really shows up in live service games right now. You don't want to deliver something once every 4 months, 6 months, 12 months. With live service games, if you can deliver a little bit frequently to keep people excited, that's the best way to keep engagement and keep people giving you feedback. Diller, you want to take 4 through 6?
Yeah, number 4 here is dependent teams and stakeholders must work together daily. I think a little bit about like the context here around daily and understanding that the folks that wrote this were really focused in like a work environment and thinking that you've got to be together all the time. And at the time, it was a lot of like getting requirements from a customer and then like, now go away for 6 months, go and build the thing and then come back. And so this was really anchoring to this idea that we need to get all the folks that care about this to be talking together very, very frequently. And so daily might not be the right cadence, but the idea is that you need that tight connection in between the people creating the thing, people that they're delivering this thing to. Number 5 is around building projects around motivated individuals, giving them the support and trust that they need to get the job done. I saw a lot of the examples, that you all mentioned in the chat followed up on this too. It's finding those folks that are really motivated. And I think there's a lot of things that can get you motivated. I think it might be you're excited about the product that you're building. It might be you're excited about what the company you're at's all about. It might be that you're excited about the team that you're working with and not wanting to like let them down. And so I think there's a lot of different ways that you might be motivated, but I do believe that motivation is an individual thing. No manager, nobody else is ever going to get you motivated. You've got to find that motivation for yourself. And if you can't, I would question whether you're doing the kind of work or if you need to be somewhere else. And then number 6 is the most effective and efficient form of communication is face-to-face. This was also 2001. And so I think about this one. I don't disagree with this statement, but I think there's different forms of fidelity of conversation. I would say like face-to-face in the same room is the highest. I would say video over Discord, over Zoom, whatever is down a notch. Phone calls down a notch. Chat over Slack, over Discord is probably down a notch from that. And then email is about the worst, unless you're going to go back to the post office. But it's when you're having those conversations, can you choose the right fidelity of conversation for what to be shared? There are some times when email works perfect. There are other times where email is about the worst choice you could make. And so when you're collaborating with people, are you choosing the correct medium to have that interaction?
Yeah, the numbers debated, but anywhere between like 65 to 90% of language is more than just the text. So it's the tone, it's your facial expressions, it's the context, it's your body language, it's everything that's built into there. And so that the more of that you can get, the better. Number 7 here, working software is the primary measure of progress. And I absolutely love that Josh put in the chat, yes, the measure of success is did it work? Yeah, like if it's working, that's a good measure of progress. Not how close are you to being done, but rather like how much working or how much is working that you've done? Has it been tested? Things like that. Number 8, agile processes support a sustainable pace of work. So we don't want to burn people out. The goal here isn't to go super fast at the cost of people's sanity. We want people to be able to deliver, and we want people to feel like they're delivering quickly, but not at a pace where they have to burn out every so often. And this is something the games industry has struggled with for a really, really long time. There's a lot of crunch that happens. You want to try to avoid it as much as possible, but the goal of Agile is to reduce that. If you can take the magnitude of the highs and lows and kind of shrink it down, it's a lot easier to absorb changes in those moments. Number 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. I have a very, very brief story on this one, which is we were creating a skin and we made a change to a visual asset and realized we broke the game. And it just was crashing. We're like, what the heck did we do? And we found out there was an asset that we were using on a skin that was being used somewhere else in the game that we didn't know that was how it was built originally. And so this was back when we were still ramping up and not the largest game in the world. But we had to fix that so that we could then move faster and not have to go back and fix all these things later on. Making things easy to fix allows you to move quicker in the long run. Diller, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really glad on how these split up in between us, because number 10 is my favorite. And it's simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, essential. And that can seem kind of counterintuitive, right? It's we're maximizing the work that we're not doing. The example that I like to give here when I'm working with like software developers is like, our goal is not to write more code. Our goal is to get an intended outcome. So like if we can get, $1 million in sales by writing 0 lines of code, should we do that? Well, probably. What about 1 line of code? Well, probably. What about 100,000 lines of code? Well, maybe not, right? And so it's not about doing more work. It's about what's the least amount of work that's necessary to get that desired value delivered. And I think that's an important part of this. Number 11, somebody called out in the chat wanting a little bit more about this one. But the best work and creativity comes from self-organizing teams. So when we think of self-organizing teams, what we're thinking about there is teams that kind of drive for themselves how the work's accomplished. I saw, some of your examples of the best teams that you'd worked on talked about like a diversity of skills. Self-organizing teams plays into that. It's this concept that we've got everyone on the team that we need to be successful. We're not dependent on this other group. We don't have to like call in a specialist that we have to wait 3 weeks for. It's got all the skills that we need on this team, and we decide together as a team how we go about solving the technical problem that's in front of us. Whether that's creating a new skin, whether that's writing a piece of software, adding a piece of functionality, whatever it is. And then number 12 says, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how they work and adapts it accordingly. JJ mentioned this a little bit, right? This moment of taking a break and like talking to people, getting feedback, and then making tweaks to the game. I'm sure you all do that. This is play testing, right? This is going out there with something, getting feedback from everyone, and then saying, how do we make this better? Like what's the next iteration of this? And We want to do that not just on the product that we're creating, but on the process for creating that product also. And so like, how do we, as people that are creating this thing, how do we want to work? How do we want to change our approach to make us more effective and deliver better results?
Yeah, I see it's in the chat. There's a few things. So number 6, absolutely, Josh. It does depend on the people. It also depends on what you're trying to communicate too. You don't have to hop on a Discord call for everything. I send Diller a Slack message and say, hey, I'm going to be online to kind of do a dry run of this at X time. I don't need to get him on a call to talk to him about getting on a call later. Like, use the method that's effective for what you're trying to do. When you're trying to collaborate and build something kind of unique, that's when 6 really is magical. Like, that creativity comes from being able to spin off of one another. And then the other one that I saw in here was number 5.
Klaus, number 6. I want to touch on that one really quick. Like, you and I have been working together for what, like 3 years, something like that. So like, we've got a lot of context. And so like, when you send me something snarky over Slack, like, I know you and I've got a lot of context for that and I can laugh at it. And like, if you and I were just starting to work and you send me something snarky, I might be a little put off by that. Like, I might not know, like, well, is he joking? Is he serious? Like, what's going on? And so I think like, the relationship that you have with the people that you're interacting with plays a big factor in whether you can go to those lower fidelity things and have that communication be effective. But having said all that, I'm sure I've stepped in it and like sent something to Klaus that he's kind of twisted his head at, even though I think we've got good context all the time. It doesn't always come across as well as it might with a different fidelity conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I also think I see number 5 on here a lot. So build projects around motivated individuals, give them support they need to get the job done. I always add my little spiel on this, which is, and get the hell out of their way. Like, there's this temptation to want to help or control or do something that maybe you don't need to. Like, if you have people that, and you can align what they want with what is valuable to go forward, like, let them do that. Let them just get out of their way and go, what can I do to help? Like, how can I help you is what a good leader does in these situations for building these products. So that's when you see kind of the magic happen. Does it always happen with every single thing? Does every company only have the ability to do what people are passionate about? No, but when you get that opportunity, take it, make it happen.
Yeah, and it's not just about like what is the individual work that you're doing something that you're passionate about. Like, it might be that like the task that you're doing at any one time is a slog, is drudgery, is a pain in the butt. But do you see how that work fits into the value that the overall thing is providing? Like, there's a story out of the 60s when President Kennedy went down to like the Houston Space Center, and he was touring and meeting with all the high level NASA officials and all that kind of thing. And like, he sees this guy in the hall pushing a broom, clearly a janitor. And like, the president walks up to him and says, "And you, sir, what do you do here?" And the guy says, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Like, the guy's cleaning toilets and mopping the floors, but he understood how his work connected into the overall mission of the organization he was a part of. And he found that super valuable, super motivating, super fulfilling. So what I would say here is like, what is that connection in between that task that's not super exciting in the moment to that overall value? And if there isn't one, if there isn't any extra value for the org by doing this thing, why are you doing it? If there's not any extra value to your game by doing this tedious task, why are you doing it? And that kind of speaks to a number 10. Like, don't do that work if you don't need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you saw, if you think back to and actually I'm just going to snap back to it real quick. When we went back to here, we talk about that it shows up through an unlimited number of practices. Not every practice is going to be perfect at all of these principles all the time. So we've got 12 principles on there. The goal here is to do as good as possible at as many as possible, and regularly ask yourself, like, hey, where might we be falling short? There's no need to memorize these. Like, I get that question a lot too. Like, hey, do I need to write these down and they need to be there? There's Google for a reason. I still don't remember them. I've been working for 10 10 or so years. Diller, you might remember them all on the drop of the hat. But it's magic when like you can, with a team, discuss how can we get more of this value as we're moving forward in that moment. Anything more to add on principles before I move forward, Diller?
I think we hit on most of the ones that folks called out in the chat. So I feel
there's one tie up to this that I just want to put in, which is this ties into what process should we use a lot even in the games industry. I got the question like, well, what process should we be using? Should we be using Kanban? Should we be using Scrum? Should we be using whatever? Should we be using Jira? Should we be using all these tools? The one process or tool that's going to be the most valuable is the one that people actually like using and will engage with. It doesn't matter if you do a process perfectly if nobody wants to do it. If people don't enjoy it, if people are like just going through the motions, because it's not going to get you good results. The best results come from motivated individuals, from self-organizing teams. They should be there to support the people and or individuals' interactions over the processes and tools. They should be there to support them, not to kind of put the rules on top of them.
Yeah, totally agree. I would say like if you really don't know where to start, like the Scrum Guide's a great starting point. What I have seen as like an anti-pattern here is that somebody looks at something like Scrum or like Kanban and they say like, yeah, that's interesting, but like let's change this, and this, and then we'll do it. And then they do that for 3 months and they're like, well, that didn't work at all. So like Scrum's terrible. And like watch out for that trap. Like make sure that like you're actually doing something that's at least close to Scrum before deciding whether Scrum is going to work for you or not. But once you've established that process, be willing to tweak it. Look for ways to improve it. Like it's a starting point. It's a framework. It's not the be all end all. Like there's no Scrum police that's going to come down and like, beat you over the head with Jira or something if you're not doing it exactly by the book. But what, like we've said a few times now, the most important things is, are you getting value out of it? Are you delivering something usable, something valuable to your customer? If you are, then you're probably close to the ideal process.
All right. So we already talked about this a little bit. So why does Agile fit so nicely for game development? So I think there's 3 big points that I like to highlight here, which is gamers are passionate. And so whenever you create something, if you get that into your players' hands, they are going to give you feedback on it, whether you want it or not. And that's awesome. It's an advantage that almost no other industry gets. When I think back to our times when we would put something on our beta environment, there would be hundreds of threads immediately on, feedback from every angle, from how it looks to how it feels to like suggestions to make it better. We would have an opportunity to take that immediately, ask the question, hey, what did we miss here? Where did we miss the mark? Where should we adapt in order to make this have more value for our players? Or what are people really resonating with? All right, can we build on that? Can we magnify that? When you have that immediate feedback loop, you can move a lot faster. On the topic of moving fast, gaming is constantly evolving, so you kind of have to adapt or get left behind. Big box games and game development cycles take a really long time. Years and years potentially. If you don't incorporate changes at some point, you might be developing on old technology, old information, old patterns. For a while, we've been in the battle royale craze. That's going to go away at some point. And if you're still developing all those, you're going to get left in kind of the past. The gaming industry moves in big trends. You want to keep moving with it, and Agile allows you to do that rapidly. And then the last bullet point here, games as a service, those smaller, more frequent patches to give people changes that they find valuable is really exciting as someone who works with agility. So that opportunity to say, wow, we messed this up. We need to tune it so that it's not ruining the experience for gamers. It's not this monumental effort to put out a patch and download and do that. It's being designed with the idea that it'll be updated over time is really exciting as someone who works in this stuff. So let's switch gears a little bit and just talk about this. We're going to talk about, where do you see some of these agile elements in the games that you play? So I've just thrown a few on here because I went really generic because I have no idea. Everyone's tastes are very different. But I wanted to just put some examples in here. And if you think of any from those principles or values that come up for you as you're thinking about it, or games that really like have some of that in there, throw them in the chat. I'd love to read them more. But I'm going to start so Stardew Valley is one that stands out to me quite a bit and is really awesome, which especially around responding to change over following a plan. I love this game. Like I've played it off and on. It's one of those games I play and I binge for like 2 months and then I stop playing and then I come back 2 months later and I just play it every day for that amount of time again. I have plans on what I'm going to do day to day, and then it rains. And I have to be able to adapt. If I keep doing the same things, I'm going to waste value. Or there's an event that happens that is like, this is higher value right now. I need to change and adapt in that moment.
Yeah, Klaus, I mean, that's that fourth value, right? Responding to change over following a plan. Sometimes when we're talking about that value, I like to call out that like that plan, when you create it, it's created when you know you have the least amount of information you will ever have. Anytime in the future, you will have new information. So when you've got a plan in Stardew Valley about like, I'm going to do this, and this, next 3 days, and then you find out it's going to rain, like, well, you didn't know it was going to rain when you made that plan. So it'd be awfully foolish to follow through on that plan. You've got new information that can enable you to make a better decision now than you could before. So given this new information, how do we want to adapt that plan? And how might that plan that you have even be somewhat useful to have actually thought through it a little bit? And now you say, how does rain fit in there? And how do we incorporate these things together? So it's not that like that act of planning was necessarily even wasteful if your plan wasn't good. It's more, how do you adapt it now, the new information that you have?
Absolutely. The other one I really like to talk about is kind of fits across Apex Legends and Overcooked and anything where you're working on a team. So Diller and I actually played Overcooked as a part of the Agile game Twin Cities meetup, where we talked about like what Agile values were about in that game. But think about when you play a game with friends and you go, all right, cool. Well, maybe we'll just coordinate and I'll send you text messages while we're playing to coordinate what we're doing on Apex Legends. Probably not going to work, right? Like that's not going to be the thing, because the most effective communication there is face to face. Can't be face to face? Let's get on a headset and talk. We can convey information in real time and collaborate. That example of it'd be really hard to do that. I think Diller pushed back to me and was like, hey, what if we played Apex Legends with conversation over email? Like, I hate email for work. I don't want to bring it into games. But it speaks to that, right? You need that quick adaptation in the moment. Diller, what stands out from these for you?
I think another example of that is like in a pandemic, right? Like in pandemic, you need to see the board. You need to know like where you have 3 disease cubes on and you're worried about an outbreak and all that kind of thing. Like what would it be like if we only like put a screenshot of the pandemic board into like a Discord channel once a day, but we had to play like all day long, right? Like what's that way that we can actually like collaborate here? Or back to your earlier example, trying to coordinate, what am I going to do on my turn in pandemic if I don't talk to everyone on my team? Or what am I going to do if I've got to do that over text communication instead of face to face, and being able to like point to a board and like show, okay, I'm going to move here to here. I can clean up this mess here, and then you can come over here and do this other thing, right? And it's just all of that. It's just that visual way of kind of seeing everything is so critical to so much of this. And I think about all the times that, especially in this like COVID world, where we don't have that shared context, that shared visual of being able to like see together what everyone's working on, and how important that is.
Sorry, I'm like geeking out a little bit in the chat talking about games as we talk about these things. And when I think about Elden Ring too, this one or any of the Souls games really for me, Like this is another one where reflect and adapt, inspect and adapt. You're going to screw something up, get killed, and go, what happened? All right, what can I experiment with? What can I try next time and see how that works? And so you inspect and you adapt, and eventually you improve over time to get better. You don't create an entire plan for the whole fight from the start. You're kind of observing to learn. And then once you've learned, you adapt as you go forward. I want to be better at these games. I'd love to be like, yeah, I really just kind of crush them right out of the gate. But I do. I have to get, beaten up a little bit and learn and adapt from it. And you can't let that get you down. Focusing and improving is really the big part of that.
Yeah, I play Path of Exile, and when you're like mapping in Path of Exile, the end game, you've got like 6 portals to go into the map, and like you've got to use one anytime you a die, and like that's there for a reason, right? Like I can learn like what's the mechanic of this fight that like I'm still getting used to. How do I dodge this attack? Or like, do I need to do some iteration on my gear first, right? Do I need to like swap out a piece of armor for something stronger to counteract some attack, right? And like all of that is inspection and adaptation. All of that is figuring out how to iterate your way to success.
Absolutely. And so, we're not here to try to sell you Agile or sell you anything. We're here to kind of explain it. And what I love about it is that the mindset kind of just happens naturally without you knowing it. When you start to hear about what Agile was meant to be kind of at its core, it stops being this like opaque process, and you realize it's a mindset of just learning and improving over time in order to get the most value out of the time that you spend working on things.
Yeah,
Any more?
Lane in the chat is bringing up Overcooked 2 and how you've got those extremely tight iteration cycles. Like it's a 2 to 3 minute game instead of like an hour-long board game or a 2-week sprint. So you've got that like super tight cycle. I wonder, okay, imagine playing Overcooked, but don't talk in between games. Like we'll let you talk, during the game while you're playing, but what if you couldn't talk in between? Right? Like that's that a 12th principle of like at regular intervals reflecting on how to be more effective. I know whenever I've played, like we've had conversations in between every round where it's like, okay, like on this next one, like you stay in this area, I'll go in this area, I'll just be focused on washing dishes, or I'll be focused on plating these things and you do this other thing. And like it's that constant inspection and adaptation, not just of your product, but of your process of how you deliver it. And I think that's a super critical one.
Yeah, I'm kind of mean when I use that one as an example on how we can learn about Overcooked, which is there's 4 people playing the game, and I add a 5th person, and I say, all right, none of you know what you're doing. We've brought in this really, really smart consultant to teach you how to do your jobs. And so none of you are allowed to talk, and they have to guide everything. And inevitably, it crashes and burns, and everyone gets really upset. And it's funny because it's a game, right? Like this shouldn't matter as much as work, but we're willing to throw that working structure into our day-to-day lives when we're creating things. Like, don't do that. Let people naturally figure out how to work together in the moment. So Overcooked 2 is one of my favorite games ever. Can't play it with some of my very close friends because we argue too much, but it's a great way to teach things like communication and some of the Agile values. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all the conversation we had. Recapping this, just to kind of touch on what we told y'all. So we focused on that Agile is a mindset. It's not something you do. That mindset is defined by 4 principles and 12 values. It shows up different for every team because it's expressed through an infinite number of practices. Your process does not always look the same as another team's process, and that's actually really good because it's not a one-size-fits-all plan. Agile works super well in game development because you get feedback early and often, and then you can bring that feedback into what you're creating to make a better product, a better game, a better experience for players. And then last, we talked about how it shows up just naturally in games and ways we learn and adapt. I'm a dad. I got 2 kids. This shows up in my day-to-day life. We do like mini sprints and mini stand-ups in the morning at times where we do things like that. So the way of agile thinking is more than just a way of developing, because it's more about learning and improving. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have in the chat. Otherwise, these are ways you can reach out to us for more info. So if you're curious about more things, you can reach out to Diller here. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you just pay me with like, hey, we were at the meetup, like, sweet. I'm happy to talk about any and all of this. There's a few videos that go through this stuff really well that are short and kind of wrap it up nicely if you want to learn more. And then where would I be without a subtle plug or not so subtle plug for the Agile Game Twin Cities meetup that we do? It's the second Thursday of each month, and you can reach out to either of us for more Slack info. So yeah, Q&A.
There's a comment in the chat, Klaus, that says, "Whoa, you do Agile with your kids." You want to say more about that? How many story points is cleaning your room?
It's always an infinite number for that one. No, I don't do it on purpose, but some of the things creep in. Hey, we did this. How could we do better next time? Type situation.
Yeah, I think one that I see with my kids is like breaking stuff down, right? So like instead of having this like massive thing that needs to be done, like we would call it like an epic in the agile space. Like we're going to break it into a bunch of like individual discrete things that provide value. And so like I do that with my kids too, right? And so it's like you don't need to like clean your whole room, just like pick up all your dirty laundry. And so like that right there provides value. So how might you get value from like some quick hit kind of thing as well?
There, I opened the door so the bonus dog that I saw someone mention in the chat can be a part of the stream. He wanted to be here too. What other questions do you have? Or Beth, we're happy to hear questions from you if you have them too. Otherwise, we're also, I think I can speak for Diller. We love when someone asks us something. If you give us room to talk, we're going to talk. And we'd love to have conversations. So this was really exciting for us to be a part of.
Yeah, no, I guess I don't really have any questions. I guess I love the approach that you took with the mindset, not going through all of the agile practices, because it's never the same, right? It's how you think about it, not necessarily how you do it. So that was really cool. And I think everybody is really excited about the principles and agile with families. I tell you, I use it with my kids too. It's like, Gabe, if you do that again, what do you think's going to happen? How can we do better next time? That's great.
I'm going to share this in the chat just because I can't resist. There's actually a TED Talk someone gave on that exact topic. So I just shared the link in the chat if people are actually curious about someone who is a little more hardcore with it than just random parts of it.
Klaus, I saw one question come in here. It says, what part of Agile do you see people skip the most?
Diller, I'd love your thoughts too. For me, I see people skip the retrospective. We don't have time. We're too busy to take the time. You were talking about that picture that we were going to throw in last second of people pulling a cart with square wheels and someone with a circular wheel saying, "Hey, do you think this would help?" And they're like, "Sorry, we can't talk about it. We're too busy." The temptation to always be doing something versus talking about how you could do it better, it really happens a lot. I'd say that's the one I see the most.
Yeah, I was going to say the same example, right? Is like it's that at regular intervals we reflect on how to be more effective and then tune and adjust our behavior. And I think teams that I work with tend to be really good at the first part about like reflecting on what's happening to them. And actually, it's not even necessarily that. It ends up being more complaining about reality, complaining about stakeholders, complaining about customers. And so it ends up being a little bit more of like a gripe session than it is like a discerning look at the work that they do. And then that tuning and adjusting behavior is really that most important piece. Like you've got to figure out, how are you going to change how you show up? How are you going to change your process to adapt to reality? There's a quote from one of my favorite authors, and Klaus will laugh because it's a Cy Wakeman quote, and I quote Cy like constantly, but her quote is like, your circumstances aren't the reason you can't succeed, they're the reality in which you must. And so given the circumstances that you've got, how are you going to change your approach to meet that reality?
Yeah, I love that. There's actually two things in the chat that have me all excited to talk about. So number one is from Lane about outside consultants and what do you think of bringing them in general. I think so. I've been an outside consultant, so I can speak from both being on the team as a not consultant, but also being a consultant in that situation. And for me, as long as you're incorporated into the team and you're being brought along with the vision, I don't see it as a problem. Where I've seen consulting become a problem is, hey, come in, implement this system or this process without learning about the team and what they're trying to accomplish, and just get them to adhere to your process because that's how we solve problems. That's where I think it falls short. So I actually don't think there's anything wrong with consulting, as long as part of that consulting is learning about the team and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, plus one to that, right? It's that coach approach of understanding kind of what's working for them, and then helping them in the areas where it's not. It's when a consultant comes in and has a preconceived idea of like the right way of doing things. I know I've gone into a teams, and essentially Klaus and I are both internal consultants at the company we're at. And so we get to go into a teams temporarily and help them with stuff. And I know I've gone in and I've seen some practices that I'm like, I would never have told them to do that. But I sit and observe and I look and see, is it working for them? And if the answer is yes, I don't touch it. Like there's no reason to like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So it's more about, figuring out, do they have a suitable process? Do they have stuff in place to help them be successful? And if they don't, how do we try something different? What's an experiment? How do we try this for a couple of weeks, a couple of sprints, and figure out, is this going to be more effective? And if it's working, just let them be.
I also wanted to touch on what I saw from Josh, where he said, I like Agile-ish, but then put like troll after. So I actually like Agile-ish too, in the context that you're talking about, in that when you're actually really applying those Agile principles and that mindset, you're asking yourself, all right, we understand why the rules are there to start at. But then you say, what can we break to fit our team? And so it's why you get a little bit of Kanban and Scrum together. It's why you see teams bring in all these different processes and mix and match as they work together and learn about what's working for them. So I actually like Agile-ish as well, and I don't think it's a bad thing to say. Like, I used to be scared of saying that around other Agile coaches and Scrum masters and be like, yeah, I don't really like out-of-the-box Scrum. Because to be honest, I don't. I find it incredibly restrictive, but I like building off of it and then building a process that works for that team.
Yeah, it's that Shuhari thing, right? And so like it's as you're going, follow the rules exactly to start, and then when you learn a little bit more, you figure out how to bend them a little bit, and then eventually you're getting to the point where you're so proficient that you're rewriting the rules and creating something brand new. And I think this is the same thing. It's follow, it's baby steps when you're early, follow the guide that you've got, and then look for those places where you want to start to bend them next.
Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to hang out for a little bit as well. But I want to speak. I probably speak for both of us. Like, thank you. This has been really fun. Diller and I are very accustomed to having everyone kind of on a call together and back and forth, and so I know we were both talking about like, man, how are we going to interact with this group? And it's been awesome through the chat and things like that. So thank you for engaging.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I love seeing all the stuff going on in the chat. It lets me know you're actually paying attention and you're actually there. So, yeah, definitely appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this evening.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for stopping by. And I think, what was it? Scott Gaff here said that he's been avoiding learning about Agile, but this was eye-opening and how common sense it is. So you've converted maybe Scott Gaff to Agile thoughts. But yeah, definitely if you want to hang out and chat for a while, we'll be down in the Gamedev voice lounges, the Minneapolis or St. Paul room. And also, I don't know, did you drop your meeting information in the Discord chat? Please do, because I would love for folks to attend the Agile Games Twin Cities meetup also.
We can do that. And we also, it's an open forum. So if you come with ideas on how this might fit with games that you're making or you've played or whatnot, we welcome that. Like, bring it in. We that's what we discuss.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up then, and we'll catch you guys in one of the lounges.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.